can duplicate that kind of success, finding those minerals, those materials, even extract them locally, things like that. When China obviously has production in place, lower amounts and lower prices, I should say, and doesn't that then conflict with Europe's own decarbonization goals? Have we really seen the rubber meeting the road of where de-risking actually comes into practice?
No, indeed, that's a very good point. Because economic security is actually not just about selling to other countries and it is also about sourcing. China has been fairly successful in its rare earth program, across a number of minerals, including lithium and other minerals that it's been using as a means of control for at least the last decade. So, which means that if we don't play nice with China, or if we do something that China doesn't like, they will actually cut down on supplies, and it has a number of means to do that. It could basically introduce environmental controls and standards and artificially suppress production of these valuable minerals in order to make sure that there is nothing left for the overseas market. And this is exactly the kind of pressure that I suppose that the European Union and other countries, notably in G7, is talking about when we are talking about de-risking. But the problem is developing these sources in the OECD economies and G7. It's a very lengthy process, and it's also quite expensive. We need to remember that Europe is pretty much urbanized, and there are not that many places in Europe you can have these extractive industries. And indeed, as the lottery of geology happens to fall out, much of these pockets tend to be in China and other places that are extremely complicated for Europe to reach.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to ask you, just sort of in summary, where is this relationship going in the coming years? The pandemic has also taught a number of lessons about supply chains, or at least thrown supply chains into question like never before. We even see with the Suez Canal right now a reminder that they can be easily disturbed. We see a lot of efforts to bring certain industries over to Europe that may have before been located more in Asia, or at least in China. With that in mind, with some of the human rights issues, with a lot of what we've been talking about now, where is this relationship going in the near term?
Well, I suppose one could say that the last 5 years, during the last European Commission of Parliament, who sits in a period of 5 years, trade policy, and especially relative to China, has been extremely complicated and to some degree frozen. Europe and China actually negotiated an investment agreement that would have opened up the Chinese market for European investment, which was frozen once we went into another circus of strategic sanctions against each other over human rights violations in China, to which China actually retaliated with economic and financial sanctions against both politicians in Brussels as well as academics who are China critical. Now, there is a silent consensus between Beijing and Brussels, and of course involving also mother-in-laws in Paris and Berlin, that we will revisit this relationship in the coming 5 years, and that we are supposed to take stock and to see if we could reawaken this investment agreement. And now, with these micro frictions going on, it's going to be quite difficult to start over on a clean slate. We are piling up issues rather than removing them. And also, at the same time, the Chinese are probably thinking that we fired the first shot, and especially on this time around with this EV investigation. And so that basically means that China pretty much look at Europe and says that the ball is actually in our court. And they are really looking to see how the next 5-year period of the European Commission and the European Parliament, how they're going to play the China game. Are we going to scale down some of these trade frictions and try to rekindle a new relationship, especially in the light of potential return of President Trump and a new, a raveling of the trading system? This is probably the China's calculation, whereas from us, from the European side, we really need certain things, not just in the area of human rights, but also in terms of level playing field, distorting subsidies, and also environmentally distorted practices that take place in China that needs to cease, or at least to some degree, at least some honest attempt to address some of these issues that have been a long-term irritant from the European side.
How different would this relationship be if there were another Chinese leader than Xi Jinping? This is someone who's been incredibly assertive, especially on issues of Taiwan, Hong Kong. His diplomats have been incredibly sharp-elbowed. There's been a change in tone, tenor, and the facts on the ground. What does that mean for this relationship?
Well, in foreign policy, we have a tendency to overplay the role of individual leaders. We have to remember that Xi Jinping is actually a product of the political system, but also the current political environment. Xi, as many other leaders in the China's past, had actually a much less policy space, especially in regards to other major economies like Europe or the United States, than you would believe. They are sovereign, but their options are not endless. That means that they can only play the cards they're being dealt. This is also one of the reasons why you see a very quick reaction to a relatively minor issue coming from the European side, simply because actually the people of China and the business leaders and party elders expect
shit! Ah, you motherfucker!
And Chinese leaders as well as European leaders must walk a very thin balance where they actually have to think about not damaging their own economy by introducing tariffs that will increase cost for their consumers and their businesses. And this is also one of the reasons why alcohol is a major target against Europe in times of trade war. Alcohol has no immediate productive effect, as far as I can tell, and it's a relatively small share of the global trade. And in addition, you can be very selective when it comes to alcohol. So, for example, if you go after brandy or if you go after wine, certain European countries come to mind. I happen to be Swedish, and I can tell you that Sweden is completely unaffected by those because we can't grow anything up there. And so, in other words, you can selectively target countries that who you want to hold accountable